Hey, how's it going, everyone? Before we get started into this next episode, I want to extend a big thank you to all of you that have signed up for my Extras membership at my Buy Me a Coffee account. If you haven't yet and you're interested in doing so, all you have to do is go to my website at falconrychronicles.com, click on the Would You Like to Support link. It'll take you right to the Buy Me a Coffee account page, and you can sign up there. It's only $10 a month. You'll get a couple of extra episodes per month and a sticker, and usually at least one of those episodes is a video episode as well, so it's gone a long way towards helping with the continued sustainability of the podcast, so I really appreciate your support and hope you're enjoying the new content for those of you that have signed up. And for those of you that haven't picked up any merch yet, that's also available at my website at falconrychronicles.com. There's t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, all kinds of stuff on there available now. So if you haven't picked anything up yet and you've wanted to, well, it's available. And for those of you that have already picked up some merch, really appreciate it. That's helped out a lot as well, and hope you're enjoying it. And now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
And I remember the first sharptail I caught. I was with Pete Widener. I had a passenger falcon, and I'll never forget because we flushed it out of a windrow in Augusta, Montana. Went out, the juror stooped it and caught it pretty easily. And I remember, I'll never forget, Pete Widener goes, "Yeah, just what I thought. They're easy." Yeah, we had no idea.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And we are, as I stated last episode, still in Wyoming, going to be here for a few weeks, and this episode, amongst a few others, were recorded while I was up in Sheridan, and I had met Jeff and Lauren Reddig up there, hung out for a few days, and had a chance to record with a handful of really awesome falconers up there, and had a lot of really cool conversations. This one that you're about to hear was with Pete Jenny, and talked to him about a lot of different things, including his involvement with the Peregrine Fund, amongst a lot of different things. And these episodes that you're going to hear over the next few weeks, there's just a lot of stuff that's covered. I obviously won't be able to do them justice by kind of summarizing in the intros here. So once again, as I've done many times before, we're just going to jump right in so you can hear this conversation with Pete Jenny, and I hope you enjoy this one and the ones up here in the coming weeks. They're going to be good ones, so here we go. I can't say it enough, and I'm always appreciative whenever people have me out to do these things or are willing to do them and help coordinate this stuff. And I'm always very humbled by how welcoming most people are and are, willing to share their experiences and stories and stuff. It was nice having dinner with you all the other night and getting to know you.
It was a terrible venue. I apologize for that, 'cause it was just a suggestion that, Brian kind of jumped on, but the acoustics were horrible in there. I mean, and I don't hear that well anyway. And so I don't know if you could tell, but I went like that a lot. Yeah. It makes a difference.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. And, something else that and granted, I've been in the audio world in some way, shape, or form since almost I was a teenager, right? So one of the things when I went to audio school that I learned was super helpful for me, and especially in noisy environments, is I had some custom audio, engineers, some more or less like what they call like professional custom-made, musicians' earplugs made, right? So they've got special filters in them. They mold them to your ears so they fit perfectly, and the filters in them basically just filter out all the garbage and bring everything down about 25 decibels. So like when you're in noisy environments like that, it's really easy to hear speech, and you don't have to constantly strain to talk and yell.
I need that, because at a cocktail party, I'm worthless. And that, if I can't see the person, I'm reading lips, I think. Right. Yeah. Just too much time in a small airplane, and in the old days, we didn't use headphones. And then in the end, we got those noise canceling things, which were unbelievable. Yeah. What a game changer. Mm-hmm. But that and shooting and, shotgun shooting.
Sure.
So I've really kind of destroyed And the 70s.
Yeah, there's always that too. Yeah, I know. Like as a teenager, if I was smarter, I would have worn earplugs a lot more during band practices and things like that. And but my dad, he was a police officer for like 40 something years or whatever, and he's got hearing damage now from shooting without hearing protection. And I understand what you're saying about the airplane aspect of things too. For a couple years, I mean, I did neonatal pediatric transport also, so I was in helicopters.
Oh, they're the worst.
The occasional airplanes and stuff, but yeah, without those headsets with the built-in mics and stuff, you're just screwed.
Yeah, but for years we didn't use those.
Yeah,
we had those little tiny things that didn't do much of anything.
Right. Yeah, it's important. And, I mean, this is, I understand for people listening, this is, unrelated, but you might get a new wrinkle in your brain here. But a lot of people don't realize that it only takes about 85 decibels at about 6 to 8 hours before you start to have hearing loss. And for every 10 decibels above that, that time's halved. So like a lot of people don't understand that. And, concerts, most of the concerts you go to are, sometimes upwards of, 115 decibels plus, so for everybody that may or may not have known that stuff, I mean, it's important to protect your hearing, man. And I know, like, when I'm out in the field with other, especially the guys that imprint Goshawks that I've flown with for like 10 years, sometimes they've had to go ahead and bring an earplug out, for their left ear. They're the guys that are right-handed, and carry the bird on their left glove or whatever. I mean, there's some guys that have actually put in an earplug in their left just because of the screaming bird that's in their ear.
I was wondering where that was going.
Yeah.
I can't hear bells, falcon bells. And I've got a good friend, Jim Entz, that makes bells, great bells, and he's made them out of brass to lower the pitch and silver. None of that seems to work. I still use bells because, a lost falcon wearing a pair of bells or a single bell, to Joe Q public, that's a trained falcon, and it might save its life.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's just more for the environmental aspect in yourself.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I get it. Yeah, I don't know. It's just people take a lot of things for granted when it comes to their overall health and their bodies and stuff. And hearing is one of those things that can go pretty quick if you don't be careful with it. But anyway, yeah, I mean, kind of, circling back around to, I mean, so what career were you, or what were you doing? Was that some of your work that you had to do with like the Peregrine Fund and stuff like that, that required you to be in airplanes so much, or was that a different career thing, or?
Yeah. I did a lot of field biology, which involved light aircraft and actually a helicopter as well. But I always wanted to fly. I like anything that flew. Okay. Whether it's a bird or an airplane and now not now, but I always have been very interested in sailing too. And those are still airfoils. That's really, flying through a little bit of a different medium. But I mean, those are my passions: is flying, birds, airplanes, sailing, maybe fly fishing.
Yeah.
And what's great about being retired is you have time to indulge in some of those things. I mean, that was really hard when I was at the Peregrine Fund because you're around all these great birds and you're around a lot of great falconers, but you don't have time to participate.
Sure.
And that was hard. That was hard on me. So life is good right now. And I'm always amazed with people that say that, gee, now that I'm retired, I don't know what to do. That's so sad.
Yeah.
I mean, every day's a Saturday for me, now. And the only drawback is, you don't have that excuse of having to go to the office. So the honeydews are overwhelming at times. So other than that, life is good.
I've heard that from a lot of people, that they think that things are all of a sudden just going to get overwhelmingly boring when they retire. But most of the people that I know, they're just like, I'm even busier than what I was whenever I had a full-time career and everything else, and I can believe it. I think if you are pursuing or have pursued a lot of different things in your life and you've lived as full of a life as you've feel like you can, at least from your own perspective for yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to get, always going to find some way to fill those gaps. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I imagine. So what kind of a typical honey-do list is what days, what does a typical day look like for you these days?
That's a lot anymore. We live in an old house.
Yeah.
And, that's like an old boat. You start at one end, you go to the other, and you start over again. And so we've repainted that house about 3 times. And I do a lot of furniture work. That's kind of fun. Mm-hmm. I like working with my hands. Back in the day, of course, we made all our own falconry equipment,
sure,
hoods and whatnot. Now there's so many unbelievable hood makers that it's just not worth your time. I can't crank out the stuff that they do.
Yeah.
So, but you had to be pretty handy in the days. When I started falconry, which is late 50s, early 60s. Then you had a couple books, and they were British. I'll never forget the first book that I had was, I think, that Falconry and Coursing volume out of the Badminton Library.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I can remember trying to find porpoise hide for jesses and dogskin. In fact, I do have a dogskin. I actually tanned a Great Dane hide and made beautiful jess leather, actually. But, I mean, you're dealing with these treatises from a different country, a different culture, and often different time. So you really were sort of on your own. Mm-hmm. And, I grew up in a fairly rural area of southeastern Pennsylvania, very British. We were a very horsey family. We did a lot of fox hunting, very British. But no falconers to speak of for a long time, for probably 4 or 5 years. And then my first mentor was Jim Rice. Great guy. He lived, but he lived far enough away where you talked to him on the phone occasionally. Back then the telephone was a big deal.
Sure. Yeah.
Everything was long distance. It's not like today. But,
right.
So anyway, you ended up making most of the stuff yourself. For better or for worse. I remember starting out with kestrels. The big problem was getting jesses and equipment that was light and small enough for those little guys.
Sure.
And jess sores were really a problem. So you take the one jess off because you had a jess sore, and then immediately get a jess sore on the other one. So you turn the bird loose and trap another one. Mm-hmm. Real challenges. But it was a great place to grow up. I mean, you literally, I could get on a horse and go anywhere. There were dirt roads where I grew up, a lot of country to fly birds. The first game hawks I guess I flew were red tails and goshawks. And we had a lot of pheasants in those days, so the hawking was pretty good. I do remember, though, I was thinking, the first bird I got actually was I bought in a pet store, and I was, I think 8 or 9 years old. And, it was a place in New York called Treflix. It was three floors. They had everything from cheetahs to whatever. And both my parents were veterinarians. Really? Yeah. And my dad was working on, I think they were chimpanzees that had some sort of a pneumonia problem. And he was working on them. And I was wandering around this pet store, and like every little kid, I loved snakes at that time. But I did wander up to another floor, and one floor was dedicated to birds of prey. And I remember vividly, they had rooms full of like eagles and hawks and large falcons. And I remember kind of looking at it, and this guy comes up and he goes, "That would be a good bird for you to start out with." And I wasn't even thinking that. But it was a little tiny cage, and it had a bird in there labeled as an Indian sparrowhawk. So he gave it to me, and I remember coming home with it in a shoebox, and we came home with I think a raccoon, some kind of a monkey, and my mother was livid because she hated that kind of stuff. I got home with that bird, and my mom goes, "We better call Corny McFadden," because she knew this guy's a falconer. Mm-hmm. So I called him up, and this is fascinating. With two questions, he identified what that bird was. He said, "What color are its eyes, and are its legs bigger or smaller around than a pencil?" And so it turned out to be a European kestrel with a clip wing, 2 clip wings, and I named it Flash. I remember. But I did catch game with it. I was rolling boards over out in the field and hop off my fist and grab those voles that would live underneath those boards. But that was my first falcon. But I remember the very first time I saw a trained falcon, my uncle's first wife was Julie Mannix's sister, if that makes sense. That's Dan Mannix's wife. And so we called him Uncle Dan, but he wasn't an uncle. I don't know what he, probably nothing. But I can remember being over there at a picnic at Dan Mannix's place, and he had falcons blocked out in the yard. And I was running around chasing one of my siblings, I guess, and the birds baited off the blocks, and my dad got mad at me, scolded me for scaring the birds. And I remember thinking, God, these are just stupid. I mean, Dad, I wasn't even close to those birds. I don't know why they're jumping off their perches like that. But that was my first recollection of a trained falcon.
That's funny. Well, I mean, that's cool, though. I mean, like, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people that grew up whenever there really wasn't much knowledge or, you know, much in the ways of mentorship and things like that, you know, usually their first experience with birds doesn't always turn out so great, you know, for obvious reasons. But no, that was cool. So, I mean, how long then did you know like Corny McFadden and some of those other guys out there?
I developed a relationship with him. I don't think my parents approved of him.
Yeah.
I remember he wanted a great horned owl, and I remember climbing a tree and of course getting attacked by the parents, and I got a great horned owl for him, and he drove out in a station wagon and gave me 2 pairs of duck wings and a mismatched pair of Indian bells, like from Lahore. Actually, they were great bells, and they lasted for a long, long time. But and he was a funny guy. He was a huge guy. I don't know if you ever.
I've heard about him and heard of him, but I've not ever really. I don't think I've even seen any pictures and stuff. But I've heard he was a fairly large guy.
And kind of guy that would walk into the room and suck all the oxygen out of the room. Great big guy with white hair. He was a Golden Glove boxer, I guess, in the day. But kind of a wheeler dealer type. I remember he gave me a glove pattern, for making falconry gloves. And this thing was huge. I mean, it only fit him. Well, it didn't do me any good, but, I made a few gloves and gave them to him. I remember one time he ordered some goshawks from a friend he had in Holland. I forget the guy's name, but he ordered a dozen of them. And the guy wrote back, "What are you going to do, eat them? I mean, why do you need a dozen?" But he would go through hawks like, like cordwood. And he would give them out, very generous to people, but, he'd always recall those as he needed them. He was a character, a real character. He died awfully young. I think he died went for a gallbladder procedure and never came out. But anyway, again, I met him several times because he would come out, and I talked to him on the phone. I used to plague these guys on the phone, I'm sure. But my real mentor was Jim Rice. And Jim Rice was a real gentleman, and he would come out. We had a few quail on our place, and he had setters. And it was fun because you go out with him, and it wasn't just one dog. He'd have at least half a dozen he'd let go at the same time. And some were kind of setters, some of them kind of weren't. It was a real mismatched bunch of dogs, but always great fun. And a good falconer. You always had a Thunderbird or two. And he caught game. He was one of the first guys on the East Coast that actually caught game. I mean, most of these guys would get, it was funny that we had access to lots of peregrines, but not very good access to game, for those falcons. So they mostly flew pigeons with them. But he actually caught game. And then he was the mentor for Bob Berry, who eventually became an important mentor for me too.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot about, the initial practitioners of falconry here in the States, where it was a lot of lure flying and flying, not so much catching a lot of, game because a lot of the stuff at the time was still with falcons, and like you said, not much access to. And it's weird that you say that though, because a lot of times the cliche a little bit was, back in the day you had all this access to land and quarry, but not so much access to birds, and now it's kind of the opposite, and
Absolutely.
and it's interesting that you say though, even back in those days, there's still at least in that area anyway, it was kind of almost same scenario as today a little bit, easier to get access.
I never thought about that's probably right, because now it's never been easier to get a peregrine. I mean, I can remember vividly, wondering if I'd ever get another peregrine. I mean, they were, in the 70s, they were very few and far between and hard to get your hands on one of any kind, whether it's a Shaheen or a whatever, I don't think my wife has ever seen a prairie falcon fly, because that filled that niche for many of us for many years, because that was the one large falcon that we had access to in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard, like I said, I've heard very similar stuff to basically what you're saying, and it wasn't really until red tails and some of the other hawks started becoming more of a thing that it kind of opened up the.
Well, that was doors, funny too, because we had red tails nesting right there, and we great adventures climbing those great big tulip poplar trees and getting red tails out of nests and whatnot. And we caught a lot of game with these red tails. God, as you know now, you can catch anything with a red tail.
Sure.
But I remember they didn't believe us. We were a bunch of kids with these red tails, a bunch of kids, I say, several of us. And I remember Al and I said, nah, you're not catching rabbits with red tails. They're not fast enough. He was a Goshawk guy. And they literally didn't believe that we could catch game with a red-tailed hawk. But one thing red tails do that Goshawks can't do is they do that. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. That tremendous crash that they do. And in heavy cover, I think they're probably better than a Goshawk. So anyway, that was, boy, it's amazing thinking about that now. But they literally didn't believe us. And I had in boarding school, I was in school with Bobby Kennedy, and he took it very personally that Al and I wouldn't believe him that we caught all these rabbits. And so he meticulously skinned out all these rabbits that we'd catch and tacked them onto a thing. And he took all these pelts down to show Al and I.
That's hilarious. No,
how far we've come, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely evolved in a lot of ways, but yeah, I've heard, like I said, I mean, and that's another reason why I enjoy talking to a lot of guys like yourself, is because, I mean, I'm almost 41, and I've still been in this sport a relatively short amount of time, comparatively speaking, to a lot of people. But people that are my age and my generation and even newer have how else could we know other than just talking to people like yourselves about how things used to be? And, so it's always nice hearing not just how the evolution of the sport in general has happened, but also from state to state, area to area. And how long were you in Pennsylvania then, and before you started moving around the country?
Okay. How do I articulate that? That's a good one. It was a progression. It went from Pennsylvania, where they had a lot of pretty amazing falconers that I learned a lot from. Corny McFadden, Bob Berry, there are a bunch of them. Jim Rice,
sure,
very well educated and good falconers, albeit with very limited access to game. And then I went to boarding school in upstate New York, and they had a lot of rabbits and pheasants, and I ended up with a European goshawk at that point. And with red tails and goshawks, we caught a lot of game. And then I went to University of Montana to college, and that's when things really kicked off, because we're talking 1970, and the Montana in 1970 had lots of game. I mean, the upland game populations were, I guess we'll probably never see that again. And again, I had access to large falcons, prairie falcons, gerfalcons, and then peregrines came back into the picture again. But more important than that, I began working with English setters. And, you know, I didn't know anything about, we always had dogs as a kid with my parents. You know, we always had a dozen dogs or so of different, you know, mostly mutts. But I got this English setter given to me by Jim Rice. And it was interesting. It was a British dog, and the gentleman that owned the dog was killed in an airplane crash, and so Jim Rice got the female out of a dog pound in Dover, Delaware. And that's a long story. I apologize.
No. That's cool.
But so he didn't know anything about the dog, but he says, "Well, this is an English setter," and Jim Rice was kind of a scrounger anyway, and this is classic Jim Rice. He took the dog. It had a litter of puppies. I got one of the puppies, and they were obviously purebred setters, and I remember riding out to over Christmas break. I'd already lost one peregrine. Joe Taggart gave me another bird that he hadn't flown yet, and I'm in the backseat of a Datsun with a falcon on my fist and a English setter in my lap on the New Jersey Turnpike, and I hitched a ride back out to Montana, and that combination really turned it around for me falconry wise. That was a real pivotal moment. I can remember walking around a field just throwing pigeons for my peregrine, and my dog, George Widener, goes, "Hey, now your dog hasn't moved for a few minutes. Maybe it's on point." I didn't know what a point was, really. And we went over there and flushed a covey of Huns. Well, there we go, you know. And so from that point on, you know, I was totally hooked on flying, you know, large falcons over a solid point on upland game. And that's really all I ever want to do. Yeah. I mean, I'll fly ducks, but that's kind of a step towards, you know, having a bird fly upland game. So anyway, that was a real game changer. And I guess that would have been, 1970 or so.
Yeah.
And then, you know, falcons became more available. The game was still really good. I had a college roommate that went on and worked for the BLM studying upland game populations, and he had really good setters. And basically all he would do is run his setters and count, you know, the sharptail and sage-grouse coveys in eastern Montana. And so in the fall, he was the first guy I called, and he knew right where to go. And we really had some great years.
I bet.
And that persisted for a long time. And it was a great cadre of people. We also had a group over in northern Idaho, Kenny Sterner, Terry Drought, and some others. And they were flying peregrines, and they had access to really good gray partridge hawking because it was an area that grew turf, you know, grass seed for sodding developments and whatnot. So there are these huge lawns, in essence, that had good populations of partridges on them. And we'd all get together, and it could be 12 of us out there with large falcons, and we just start walking. That was great. Anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like a paradise that a lot of us will never know. Yeah, unfortunately.
I think that's gotten built up around the Rathdrum Prairie is what they called that then. But it was a great bunch of guys. It really was.
Yeah, I bet. And like I said, I mean, our generation, or I should say my generation and newer, is never, unfortunately, going to know what it was probably like back then to be able to have that much of an abundance of not just quarry, but places where there was that much quarry also. And no, like I said, I mean, I'm always envious whenever I talk to all you guys from that generation and stuff. Like, it always makes me kind of jealous a little bit.
It was easy, you know. I even with training a dog, we never did any electronic training. I didn't even know what that was. We didn't have to. You just put them on game, and it's good dog, bad dog kind of stuff. And the same thing with a falcon. The only people that didn't have good game hawks were people that didn't fly their hawks, because if you have enough game, it's all pretty easy. It really isn't that hard. Well, it's gotten a lot harder, but it isn't. it's not all bad. I mean, there's stuff that's going on now that we didn't know about. One example is, like this Marshall telemetry. God, what a game changer that's been. You can fly your bird much more loosely. You can let them go out. You still got eyes on it, kind of, and it can be 3 miles away, but it turns and it's coming back. You don't chase after it anymore. And we sure used to. But I can remember flying large falcons without telemetry.
I hear stories about that too.
It worked,
and
kinda.
yeah, sort of. Most of them. Though I always kind of joke with people. It's there's probably a reason why a lot of these old kings and emperors and these royalty would send people out to trap and bring back literally like just ridiculous numbers of these birds, because they're probably losing quite a bit of them too.
Well, if a bird caught game out of sight, a passage bird, that was usually the end of the game.
Yep.
And in fact, the first telemetry that, people like Barry, that's where the RB came from. That was Robert, was really designed to find a bird on a kill. It wasn't for tracking a bird down that's gone AWOL. It was really for picking up birds on a kill, because they go out of sight on a kill, and that was the end of it. They'd feed up and they're gone.
Sure. Well, we'll count this as the occasional Marshall plug that do every so often. Thanks, Robert and company.
Well, but and those changes, I will say, aren't easy to make. I resisted for a long time. My wife said, I'm just buying it for you.
Yeah.
And she did, and I can't imagine living without it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my couple of experiences with bigger long wings, like there's no way. I mean, like there's a couple of birds that I know that I would have lost probably at least 3 times had I not had that. And yeah, I mean, I remember people talking a lot about even when traditional beeps, like you were just talking about, it's like whenever that came on the market, that was like everybody looked at that, to some degree, like they look at GPS now and stuff, like it's the greatest thing.
It was. It was. Yeah.
It's fun. Like I said, it's just fun. It's funny seeing the evolution of things.
So the good old times, they probably are right now. I mean, we have access to the best birds we've ever had, and there's still game out there. You can still find game. It's evolved though from, lots and lots of game, which made it pretty easy, to it's much more intellectual. You have to be more of a biologist. I think maybe you savor those good flights more. Like this year, I'd put a hunt in, and I could reflush it and catch it, no problem. I'd call the bird in. I don't want to, deplete my local game bird population. Doesn't hurt the bird any. They don't have to kill everything that you flush for them. Well, if you wanted to, they don't need to. If they lay a foot on something and feather something, that gives them plenty of stimulus. It really does. So, you evolve over time. There's a succession that goes from, when you first get into fishing or any kind of a hunting sport, it's a volume thing. You start counting, then it goes to sort of quality, and then it might go to, the equipment that you use, and ultimately, and you try to make it harder for yourself, because you become more and more of a perfectionist, which you'll never, solve all these problems. But then ultimately, I guess, and this is, what I ended up doing most of my adult life, you ultimately want to give back to a resource. I think that's the full circle. And, I became involved with the Peregrine Fund very early on. Bob Berry, I was still a high school kid, and I accompanied him up to the Eastern Arctic, and we collected some of the first peregrines. This is in the late 60s and 1970 for the Peregrine Fund. And the Ungava Bay area. Great trip. I mean, really wonderful trip. And from that point on, I pretty much worked off and on for the Peregrine Fund in one form or another. One of the first release sites on the Susquehanna River for peregrines. And then, later in the tropics, the neotropics. Culminating with, becoming the president of the organization. From a falconry standpoint, the higher you went, the more it impacted your falconry. And so that's why it's so wonderful now to be retired and being able to really devote. That's my big focus now, is my falconry.
Yeah.
So,
well, and yeah, I mean, if you put in a lot of years, in service to other aspects of what we do, then I feel like you earn that. I mean, you earn the right later on to kind of focus back on yourself because of the years that you sacrificed, in other ways. And
it really wasn't a sacrifice. That's too strong. But what's funny, and I talked to my sort of cohorts of my age group. When I see a peregrine, I get really excited. I mean, I know there's peregrines everywhere now. I mean, they're more common than prairie falcons now, but darn, it's a peregrine, and my heart rate goes up. And when I'm banding peregrines on the beaches, every time I get one in my hand, it's I'll never get over that. Because I think I lived through that stage where, boy, they were few and far between. I mean, they really were.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever outgrow that.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the whole full circle thing. I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, that, like I said, there's always got to be some sort of gratification involved and fun and passion. Otherwise, we wouldn't do this and have anything to do with this. And I can understand, or at least appreciate, even though I obviously haven't done that aspect of things on my own yet. But I mean, I can appreciate that's got to be really fulfilling. I mean,
well, how crazy an idea that was, and we didn't know it was going to work. First of all, no one really knew how to breed these things in captivity. Well, a few people did, Heinz Meng and some people in Germany during the war did, but not at a conservation level. To do conservation, you have to produce a lot of birds fairly efficiently to recover a species. That was one aspect, and we got that done. And I will say, at the same time, or just before that, the Fish and Wildlife Service gave up. I mean, government couldn't do it. And you know why? We were just talking about, a government employee doesn't have that, whatever it is that gets you out of the bed in the middle of the night. If someone wants to do something bad enough, guess what? They'll figure out how to do it.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly. And, having an incredible vested interest, like we all did in getting a peregrine again, maybe to fly in falconry. Gee, wouldn't that be wonderful? And I remember thinking that was like a dream. I mean, and not even a very realistic one. And then being able to release the darn things, and a couple of years later, they show up again and start breeding. I mean, how amazing is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that was just, I mean, that it's amazing that it even worked.
Yeah.
And boy, did it work well.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's amazing that you all were able to get the resources together to accomplish all that. And yeah, I mean, there's I kind of laugh a little bit whenever people talk about, not being able to do this, or I can't really do that, or whatever. And what I found is that most of the time when people say things like that, it's just, well, they didn't really want to honestly do it that bad to begin with. I mean, like, if you really want to truly be successful or have some degree of the ability to do whatever, then generally speaking, it's more of a matter of persistence than anything. There's a lot of people that just give up too quick, I think. But
boy, isn't that the truth? I ended up having to do a lot of development work, over the years, and I can remember talking to people, not falconers, but people that were in a position to be able to help us out financially. And I remember a lot of those individuals would just look at you and go, well, I can tell you guys have a vested interest in this, and so this may be something we might want to support. This is sort of you're the real deal,
Sure. Yeah. And
it's kind of a human condition, I think, more than anything.
It is. I mean, and some people, I think, and I don't mean this to sound bad, but I mean, I think that the reality of the situation is that some people, drive and motivation is just more ingrained in them than their personalities. I mean, some people have. Well,
there is that. There's your parents, aren't there? And here's the thing with this whole bird thing. I was never supposed to be doing birds.
Right.
My parents were, very academic, very serious. It was a I grew up in a Quaker family, which is all about, you're here to do good, to contribute, they really harp on that. But the falcon thing, I was just totally hooked on. And I think some of it was their undoing, because I was always supposed to be doing something else, but whenever I had a chance, like to be in a library, I'd always check out everything on birds of prey, or, when I'm exercising a horse, I'm always looking up in the trees for hawk nests. You don't have to steer, really. It's great. Horses are great for finding stuff. But, if you don't let someone have their fill in something, it makes them crazy for it. Forbidden fruit,
Sure.
That's a very tantalizing thing. And for me as a child growing up, I never could get my fill with birds of prey, because I was always supposed to be doing something else, working or whatever. So I think, but think about this. I mean, how lucky have I been? Because, here is an interest that it involves nature. You have to be a biologist. You have to find this bird. You have to catch this bird. Then you develop a trust with this bird. You develop a relationship with the bird. You go out and catch game with this bird. And then maybe even develop that bird as a breeder down the road and produce more young with it. I mean, what a return on an investment. If, for instance, I go out fishing, I love to fish. I catch a fish, that's sort of the end of the game, right? Yeah. You might eat it, but that's it.
Yeah.
But, when you catch a bird of prey, that's just the beginning. That's just the first act. Sure. How cool is that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, like you said, you catch a fish, you release it back, you want to catch the next fish. But I mean, that whole thing, that journey is not quite as involved by any stretch. And I mean, you're like you said. I mean, whenever you obtain these birds, there's still so much. I mean, there's months, or you hope months anyway, left worth of time that you're developing this relationship with this animal. And there's not really many forms of hunting, or I don't even know if there is any other forms. I mean, aside from just like horsing dogs or
not with a wild animal, I think.
No.
And as you know, no two are alike.
No, I
mean they're all apples and oranges, and
sure.
And that developing that relationship is really very addicting.
Very, and because I mean the whole allure, as it's been discussed many times, of what we do is it goes back to the forbidden fruit thing, like. Getting a chance to see something that we don't normally ever get to see, and having a front row seat for.
Wow, that's the other thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a funny form of bird watching. Yeah. We're just rigging the deck enough so that we can see what this incredible work of art does. Mm-hmm. You get a good seat at in the stadium. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why now, later in life, I'm so impassioned with passage birds. I'm really focusing these days, now that we have access to passage peregrines again. Mm-hmm. God, how wonderful is that? I never dreamed that would ever happen again, but it is. And anyway, think about this. If you take a bird out of the wild, whether it's a nestling or a passage bird, every one of that bird's predecessors, parents, grandparents, back to the origin of that species, has been success. Mm-hmm. A success, not a single failure in that line. That's pretty amazing. It's daunting. Talk about one of nature's works of art. Mm-hmm. And you have access to mess around with it. Yeah.
Well, and also knowing that, how many of those birds aren't a success either. That whole 75 to 80% statistic of birds that die every year in their first year of life because, well, they're not going to be a success, obviously.
Nature's done a lot of work for you.
Yep.
The other thing about falconry too is, and this is what kind of Tom Cade's, one of his lines is, one of the things he always said about working with birds of prey is you get to get them in your hands. Mm-hmm. You get to handle them. Mm-hmm. And it is very hands-on. And humans as a species are very tactile. If I tell you, be careful, that wall that we just painted that wall, mm-hmm. you'll probably go over and touch it. Just to verify that, again, doing development work, I'd always take a bird with me. And people are always fascinated that their feet on a bird of prey are warm, you know. So it's really important that you're able to touch things in nature, and that's getting harder and harder. A boy can't go out and get a pet crow anymore. It's not legal. And that's sad. It's sort of too bad,
Yeah.
I mean, all these miscellaneous critters we had as kids are really what makes you a biologist as an adult.
Well, and as human beings, there's also this weird detachment thing that we have too, where if we don't experience it for ourselves, we can't, for whatever reason, seem to fully appreciate it. It's like there's a lot of people that until they have that moment where they get to touch that and they get to see something up close, there's always this like, whatever. If it, if that dies or if that does this or whatever.
The Nature Channel can only take you so far.
Exactly. I mean, you can watch all the Discovery Channel documentaries and stuff that you want, but until you actually have a bird sitting on your glove or whatever, or get a chance to, like I said, or like you were saying, kind of touch their feet or their, and see like a bird like that up close, and you're just not gonna care as much.
No.
I can attest to that.
Amen to that. And I don't know what the solution is there, because I understand, trying to protect wildlife and kind of distance them from this, expanding human population. You got to give them their own space. But at the same time, humans are the only species that can preserve another species. We're the only one that can do that. And so if we don't have that interest, guess what? It's all lost.
Sure.
So there's got to be some give and take there. So I know we're supposed to talk about politics, but, we need to lighten up a little bit on some of these regulations. We need to create more opportunities for kids to interact with wildlife. I had a very wonderful childhood, and we had everything. We had an elephant, we had lions, we had every kind of animal you can imagine. With both my parents being vets, living in the country. And I tell people this, even my own children, I tell them these stories. They go, "God, Dad, I can't believe you did that." And I go, "Well, yeah, you could do that, couldn't you?" They probably couldn't, And again, a lot of these things were injured animals and whatnot, but still, I learned an awful lot from non-human interactions.
Sure.
And I think a lot of that helped me with my human interactions too.
Yeah. Well, and you never really understand what other people experience or go through until you kind of, once again, see it for yourself. And it's funny that, we're kind of talking about this at the moment, because I actually had a sort of a similar kind of experience. I mean, when I was down recording, with John Kaufman the other day, he lives on that ranch and stuff, right? So, he was showing me around the next morning, and I made the comment. I was just like, this is a really the type of cool place for a kid to grow up. Now, I made the comment too that something like that would have been a living hell for me, because I had such horrible allergies, whenever I was a kid also. But overall, how cool is it for a kid to grow up and they're responsible for feeding the chickens and feeding the sheep and this, that, and the other, or whatever the case is. And you're growing up and you have this whole altered perspective and relationship that a lot of kids living in a more urban environment and stuff will never
and
have.
You know how fast that's changed. I mean, just think about a generation or two ago. Just a very short period of time. If you were a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, you still had to hitch up the buggy to the horse to go to work, to get around. You had to look at an old book on dog training. I like books. And so I get a lot of old books if I can. And I love old books on dog training. And they skip these huge sections on working with a dog, because everybody just assumes that you already know all this stuff because you've been working with animals all your life. Well, guess what? Not nowadays. You got to write everything out step by step by step, and then we're using all this electronic stuff, which, don't get me wrong, really does work well. But it's a whole different deal, I don't think our species has had much of a chance to evolve. It's happened so darn fast, you know. So anyway, this is way off the subject of falconry.
But it all ties in when you really think about it, though, because I mean, once again, I'm right. Basically, society is what it is now as far as our population growth and technology, but all of the newer people coming in, that's all they know about it, though, you know. And so it's good to talk about and keep into perspective how the evolution of all this has happened, because people like myself, I didn't even get to see it, you know, let alone all these even younger people that are coming in now. And I mean,
it's still out there, you know. We were talking about that earlier, that, you know, that's gone. What it is and it isn't. You just have to try a little harder, and there's just less of it, so you got to savor it a little bit more, I think. You know, I go out with my birds now, and I don't, you know, catch, you know, lots and lots of grouse every year, but I get a lot of great flights, and I don't care, you know, if I get a flight, you know, if I catch something, if I feather it, that's even better. But it's still the high point of my day.
Sure.
You know, you take what you can get, and I don't know, you know. Well, I'm old. I'm 72. You know, I can see myself out there in a hover around, you know, throwing pigeons for a peregrine. I don't, you know, that I'll still do that, and it'll still be the high point of my day.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and you always find it all goes back to, once again, where there's a will, there's a way. And for as long as you want to keep doing it, and if you want to do something, like your choices are really simple. Either you can move here, or do this, or do that, or you just don't do it. And I think the people that want to do it bad enough still throughout their life, they may have to make concessions, but they're still going to figure out a way if they still want it to be a part of their life. You know, so.
That's a problem that I have. You know, there's some great places in this country to fly just grouse, let's say, and prairie chickens. But you go to some of those places and you fly your bird, what that might take an hour, maybe 2 hours tops. Then what do you do the rest of the day? You know, you're in the middle of nowhere. You know, you're in some little weird hotel. That's become less and less appealing to me the older I get. You know, I'd almost rather, it's funny. I guess I've caught a lot of game, so it doesn't really matter so much, but I'd almost rather stay home. And it's sort of like, you know, fishing the stream in your backyard. There's a lot of value there, even though those fish are smaller and fewer. But, you know, it's that home covey, you know.
Well, and to your point on that too, there's a lot of these places that I know we're kind of in generalities talking about that still exist, that are good for certain aspects of falconry. The only problem is is that it's once again going back to the whole concession thing. What are you willing to give up, or, you know, in the other aspects of your life, not necessarily even give up, but like maybe be less, I don't know, like fond of, so to speak. Like there's certain states and certain places that still have certain things in abundance. However, I would be absolutely miserable living there. So, you know, there's that. I mean, there's that give and take. I mean, I guess the what it boils down to is there's less places where you can kind of have the best of all worlds these days.
And I want to raise a family, and I enjoy being married.
Yeah.
You know? Right. I mean, there's a lot of other things besides falconry that kind of actually, you know, contribute to your falconry. You know, I wouldn't be as successful, or I wouldn't be enjoying my falconry as much as I do, you know, if not for my wife. You know, she's very involved. You know, when we go out, we like to walk. And so she does the dogs and I do the falcon. And we go on these big, long tours. And I'll tell you, you know, COVID was very, very good to Pete Jenny. I mean, there were a couple of years there where I didn't have to do anything. And, you know, I knew all the grouse and huns in Sheridan County on a first-name basis, because that's all we did. It was fantastic. Yeah. God, the dogs were in great shape. We were in great shape. You know, again, you have to adapt, I guess.
Sure.
And there's always sort of a silver lining out there, I think.
Yeah, there always is. And sometimes you discover, whenever you make these quote unquote concessions, right? Sometimes you find that as you go on, you're not really making any concessions at all, because you find, I'm actually having more fun doing this than I really thought I was going to. I mean, that was like me in squirrel hawking. I mean, I now regret that I wish I would have done squirrel hawking from the very beginning now, because I've discovered that that's fun as hell, and it wasn't even until 8 years into falconry that
I wish they didn't bite so badly.
Yeah.
God, they can really hurt a hawk, can't they?
They can, but you know what? A lot of those really aren't. They get over exaggerated in a lot of cases, but tell you what, there's still nothing really like watching a hawk and a squirrel. That chess match, for watching that sometimes upwards of 30 minutes to an hour with that same squirrel and stuff. I mean, there's very few things that are like that or can compete with that. In my book.
Yeah.
But anyway, circling back a little bit though.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm kind of all over the map
This
here.
this is great though. I mean, this is just like I said. I mean, I love having these kind of natural kind of conversations.
You're going to have a lot of editing to do. I'm afraid.
Not as much as what you think. I mean, a lot of this stuff is good stuff. But I do want to ask you though that, I mean, Wyoming currently, or has had for a while, like a state club, correct, for falconry, and you're currently the president of that, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
only reason because no one else will run. I mean, I that was sort of part of that giving back thing. Okay, now I'm retired. I was able to move back to we kept the place in Wyoming. So when I left Boise and moved back here when I retired, I said, okay, I'll go ahead and get involved in the club and whatnot. So I ran and became the president. And then I go, well, guys, it's time. We need a succession here. It's really good for everything to have different people involved. And you think I could talk someone else into running? It's not that hard a job. I mean, we have great laws in the state. We have, our game populations are pretty good, and access to birds. So things are usually pretty good. But gosh, try as I might, I can't get anybody else to. So yeah, I am the president, but I'd love to step aside.
Well, you'll be able to. I mean, there's always somebody that you think that, or at least you don't think that anybody's going to step up. But then when it comes down to brass tacks, usually in the end, literally at a 0 hour.
That's probably not what you wanted to hear. So maybe we need to cut all that
out. No. That's good though, because I mean, once again,
I don't do a lot.
Yeah, well. Well, here's the thing that, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because what I like to discuss with people are some of their experiences in doing that and serving in some capacity, but also to emphasize, to people that may think, I think that at the root of it, it's not necessarily that they think it's going to necessarily be a lot of work or a lot of responsibility. I think that there's just a lot of people that for whatever reason think they're not going to be adequate or have anything to offer in any kind of capacity. But in reality, it's really far from the truth. I mean, it doesn't have to be in this grand capacity where you can give back and contribute back to a state club or anything like that. But the point is, though, is that it's important, because if nobody is going to do it, then you're going to eventually lose certain things.
Yeah, and we've lost a couple battles that I wish we hadn't. Well, battles. A couple issues have come up that I wish that we would have prevailed, and we didn't. And we've won quite a few too, but and I can talk about those if you want me to. I mean,
yeah. I mean, you can speak in generalities or however specific you want to be with it. But I mean, these things are also important.
But you're right. Yeah. It never ends. There's always a need to have a unified voice. More than just one voice. A group has a lot more. Power to it. But in Wyoming, the one thing good about Wyoming, there's not very many people. I think we're still the least populated state in the country. What, 600 and some thousand?
Yeah, it's either 500 or 600 something thousand.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So, you play softball with the governor. I mean, you know everybody. But you still don't get your way all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing is, I can understand where the job would be a little bit easier in a huge state with a very small population per capita, relatively speaking, but still, there's still got to be somebody that is willing to put the time in and take up the mantle, though.
Well, the hard job in a club like ours, at least, is the secretary treasurer. I mean, they do all the work. I mean, God bless them. I mean, they call the meetings, they do all the work, and they don't get much, recognition. Try to give them recognition, but I mean, that's where the heavy lifting is, quite frankly. I mean, president, vice president, those are, just positions, really. Anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I mean...
Club politics.
Yeah, well, there's... Yeah, and
well, we don't have a lot of them because we don't have a lot of people. I guess we could if we wanted to.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it would be kind of weird, though, for no more people that are in the state and also Falconers.
We're having our 50th anniversary, I guess, this year, which is significant.
Yeah, there's a chance I might end up back for that. I'm not really sure yet, but it really just kind of depends on timing with a lot of things. But I mean, I am just kind of curious, as to, and once again, I mean, you don't have to go into super detail if you don't want, but I mean, what are some of the unique challenges that you've had to deal with in regards to some of those things here in the state, just at least in your time and your tenure?
Well, the big things the one thing is maintaining access to game, and sage grouse are a big issue here in Wyoming, and for a lot of people in parts of the state, that's all they have upland game bird wise, and for a variety of reasons, sage grouse have been declining, for decades. And I know we lost the ability to access that species for falconry just this last year here in Sheridan and Johnson County, the two counties right here. We tried to say, well, look, why don't we work out something where it becomes a trophy? You're able to catch one bird and then that's it. At least that way you can be out in the field running your dog and enjoying the resource. They didn't go for that, so we kind of lost that. But at least we're at the table, and they listen to us sort of. But a bigger issue that's come up is, the state veterinary director requires us now to get a USDA certified veterinary health certificate for every bird that comes in and goes out of our state. And, it's sort of a case of one size fits all. Birds of prey are pretty unique because they're dead-end vectors. In other words, if I touch something and I'm a bird of prey, I'm going to kill it and eat it. I mean, so the chance for the for infection ends right there. Well, we tried and we failed. We couldn't get them to go along with that. Birds of prey and our falconry birds should be exempt from that. And there are exceptions already that are in place. People with cage birds, parakeets and canaries can bring birds in and out of the state without any kind of permitting. So we lost that one. Yeah. But we're not done. We'll come right back again. The state vet is an ungulate person that's basically focused on chronic wasting disease and doesn't really know much about birds, and certainly not about birds of prey. And I probably gave them too much information. I got really great letters from Pat Reddick and some others, explaining, the ecological significance of where a bird of prey is in the infection landscape, wildlife landscape. And I probably gave them too much information, but we'll try again.
Yeah. Well, and eventually you might get them to come around, especially if you keep having more and more people that are technically colleagues or on the,
It's
from
a
other
real
vets.
it's a real pain in the neck because a lot of us we're only 30 miles away from Montana, and a lot of us, I'll fly in Montana tomorrow, and I have to have this health certificate, and they go, well, it's good for 30 days. Well, that means I have to get 3 or 4 of them in the process of a year, and then try to find a USDA certified avian veterinarian.
Yeah.
There's like 1 or 2 in the state of Wyoming.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have one here. But a lot of folks aren't that fortunate.
Sure.
So yeah, there's problems like that. I guess every state has their problems. But,
yeah, I mean everybody's got their own unique challenges, and usually those vary from state to state for sure. Yeah, and every state has differing relationships with their DNR and stuff too.
I think ours is pretty good. I mean we these have all been polite conversations.
Yeah, civil.
Yeah, civil. Thank you.
Civil discourse.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's good, and because that's one thing I like to emphasize over and over again is that it's really important to try and have those civil and nice relationships with the government agencies and whatnot, because it can obviously not be very fun otherwise. And
I remember the days,
Yeah.
back in the 70s, not even the 80s, I guess more so, during Operation Falcon and all that. Gosh, it was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to too many about. I mean, or too many falconers about that. You hear things in passing and stuff. I mean, understandably so. It's one of those things that not very many people are very, like gung ho to talk about or relive memories about. But I know other people had to deal with a lot more during that era than others. But
well, we've really, the general perception of falconers has really improved. And I think in large part because of, successful recovery efforts that have, and I think rightfully so, been responsible, been the result of falconers' efforts. And that has really changed the opinion of the public for falconers. I mean, I think we've really benefited from that. When I was a kid, I mean, you didn't really talk about what you did.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. I understand, kind of somewhat of the mental barrier. I don't even know if that's the right way to put it, but the reluctance or the hesitancy to want to, share from the people that have been doing this for a very long time. Like I get it, but at the same time, in the age that we live in, I know I don't have to tell you this because you've seen the evolution of it all, and I mean the cat's out of the bag. Like there's no putting it back in, and like the only thing we can do is continue to try and create our own positive narrative in the eyes of the rest of the world, basically, and what we do, because we are such a small community, and the collective voice that we have is not going to be anywhere near as loud as some of the other groups that unfortunately exist, in some ways, as far as the people that are detractors and don't really understand what we do, so, but I mean, is there anything that you remember from that era, or like, were you affected by that at all personally or anything?
I was actually very fortunate. I never really had any, direct interaction. But I do remember, like the fish game, thinking that you were a bad person, and you had to prove them otherwise. You had to prove yourself that, hey, this guy actually isn't a bad guy. And they just assumed that falconers were, breaking the law or doing something. When I was a kid, that was sort of the case, and that's really changed. And we weren't, they just assumed we were. Yeah. Everybody thought that people were selling birds to the Arabs and, all that nonsense.
Yeah. 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 And I just, like I said, it's another one of those things that, I can't really relate to because I wasn't there to see it or experience it. So, and understandably so, like I said, there's not a whole lot of people that are super like gung ho, willing to share, a ton of details about those times. But I think that is also, for better or worse, an important part of the history and all this stuff too. And, it's just, once again, there's lessons to be learned from everything. I do want to shift things back though. And I do want to say thank you also for being willing to be transparent about some of your experiences with the roles and that, I know I'm glad to hear, or the roles as far as you're serving your time in the club anyway and stuff. I know that,
I don't know what I said.
no, I mean, what you said was another thing good for people to hear though, because once again, anytime you can, even though you're not going to always come out ahead or agree, I mean, it's nice to,
okay.
Like it's one of those things that people need to understand that, keeping a cool head during a lot of things.
We'll keep after it. I mean, I'm sure we'll prevail ultimately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it just takes time and patience, and
it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
We have a lot of education before us.
Yeah. Not a lot of people have, the ability to be as, persistent and or patient as others. So it's just, once again, even if you're not overly if those are traits that you don't necessarily have in abundance yourself, it is nice to remind yourself though, you got to take a step back every so often and just play the long game, with some of that stuff. But I mean, as far as some of your other the other aspects of your personal falconry and everything else, like I mean, you're still practicing pretty hardcore for the most part still to this day, correct? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I don't think. Well, there was never a time that I didn't have some sort of a bird of prey, except for 4 or 5 years at the Peregrine Fund. I had I messed around with a few passage merlins. I don't think I ever caught any game with. Yeah, I guess I did catch a little bit of game, which they carried. No, it was fun. No, but other than that, I think I've always had some sort of a bird of prey or two. That's always been the focus of my life, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's been some other things too, but in conservation too, that really helped. I was very much involved, of course, with the peregrine recovery, but also with the Aplomato work. We collected, the first Aplomatos for breeding and then reintroduction. Also with harpy eagles and orange-breasted falcons. So I've been able to work with some other birds of prey as well. And, your experience in falconry really helps with that, being able to handle them and capture them. And
do you think the road to, some of those other projects is going to continue to probably be longer than like the peregrine effort was? Or how do you see that being, comparison wise?
The peregrine, in hindsight was all about DDT. You eliminate DDT, you release captive raised birds and they take care of frankly, they would have probably recovered on their own. Maybe not in our lifetime.
It would have taken longer.
It would have taken a lot longer. Yeah. So that was, I hate to say simple, but it was simpler than some of these other projects. The Aplomato Falcon Project is all about habitat, but on a macro sense. It's brush encroachment, great horned owl populations. And I think, the absence or presence of great horned owls in the environment, in the landscape, will sculpt what, potential habitat still exists for Aplomato falcons. Given a chance, they do just fine. But whether we'll ever get that population to the level where it can be effectively removed from the endangered species list, I don't know. A lot of that has to do with politics, quite frankly. The California condor, the problem there is lead in the environment. These are human issues. There's solutions. We know the solutions to these things, but to get people to agree to those, even without sacrifice, is a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
We worked in Hawaii with a bunch of endemic species there. But, that's all about, people and pigs and rats and mongoose and even malaria, but all starting with people, So, I should have taken a lot more sociology and psychology, not biology in my undergraduate, work. With the harpy eagle, the problem with the harpy eagle is it's a species that has absolutely no fear of anything and doesn't mix well with people. They come out of the canopy because they're curious of these funny little humans, primates on the ground, and they come down, they roll their head around, and they're not being aggressive, but people think they are, and they get shot, even with slingshots, so they don't mix well with people. I can go right down the list. Every one that we're involved in now, I think, is probably much, much harder than the Peregrine. But the Peregrine gave us the impetus, the success. It gave us the credentials, that we could work on some of these, frankly, more challenging projects.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's.
I don't know if that made sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, I can understand. It's whenever you can identify a particular thing and take it away, then that's an easy solution. But it's not, the much harder solution is getting people to change their habits and their perceptions and their the way they just their overall way they do things. I mean, I mean, if the problem is habitat loss or other factors, well,
it's people either directly or indirectly. Where peregrines do just fine in urban settings. I mean, the densest nesting population we know of peregrines in the world is New York City. They do just fine, given a chance, given a second chance. There's a lot of work to be done, but boy, we've done an awful lot. I mean, there's species coming off the endangered species list other than the peregrine, so we've done an awful lot and continue to do so, but, it's not going to end.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's only going to keep growing probably, unfortunately.
But you got to remember that humans as a species are really unique because it's the only species on this planet that has the wherewithal and the desire to do something about this. I mean, if not for humans, nothing would be recovered. They just sort of come and they go. And maybe that's a natural scenario. I don't know. I think, unfortunately, humans are accelerating the rate of those changes.
Yeah, I mean,
but we are the solution. We're the cause, and we're also the solution.
There you go. That's what I was going to say. I mean, unfortunately, we're both.
I'm an optimist. You have to be in this game.
Well, I mean, we need some of those. And it was funny because going back to my talk with John Kaufman the other day, though, I actually had to give him props. I was like, you're one of the first optimistic, you're like one of the first like true optimists that I've talked to and about some of this stuff. And I kind of cracked him up a little bit. But yeah, no, I mean, and like I said, I am curious though. And because I mean, I think most people by now have, or at least somewhat familiar with the Peregrine effort, and that's gotten publicized, a ton over the years.
Yeah, the hardest thing there was turning that thing off.
Yeah,
I mean, it took us a couple of years to turn that whole mechanism off. Look, it's a recovered species. Now we got to move on.
Right.
And the same people in the government, federal and state, that we dragged into this thing, kicking and screaming, didn't want to let it go because one of the few success stories they had.
Yeah.
That was a real problem.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem because there's, talk about a limited resource. There's only so much money to go around. And you really can't spend money on something that doesn't really need to be done.
Very true. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's, whenever something turns into a money source or mechanism, then I can see that.
Oh, I love working with peregrines. The only thing that we really need to keep working with peregrines on is they're a wonderful mechanism for getting a handle on what's going on in the environment. I mean, what a great collecting tool that nature's given us. I mean, from 1 cc of blood, you can learn an awful lot about what's out there in the environment during those oil spills and whatnot.
Sure.
And, we've got decades of data supporting all those changes over time. And so, they're good for that because they're very sensitive to changes in quality and quantity of their environment. So they're good for that. But we've kind of gone full circle. Now we've sort of recreated a tool that we can now use going forward. But that's about as far as it goes with peregrines. They're doing just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and it's nice to have kind of the foundational schematic for future endeavors.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, there's no process or no, I don't know, methods of doing something that I think is ever going to be perfect, but it's nice to have a place to start. So,
well, and it's a little bit like the space program too. They've just adopted a thing called a safe harbor for the ocelot in South Texas. I was just reading about this, and that was developed for a number of species, but primarily the largest was the Oplomato falcon. We had millions of acres enrolled in a safe harbor program to enable us to be able to reintroduce an endangered species on private property without that landowner fearing for loss of control of his property. I mean, those are insurmountable problems. They were, 20 years ago. And they're using that same model or mechanism for other endangered species now in this country. And so, what's good for Oplomato falcons is also good for other species too. Did you need me to explain the safe harbor to people kind of know what that is?
No, I mean, I think it seems like it's fairly self-explanatory for the most part.
It was a big deal. I mean, a lot of folks within the Fish and Wildlife Service, thought we're, giving away the farm. I mean, it was really hard to get them to agree to those sorts of programs. And, we weren't giving away anything. We had nothing. Texas was 97% private property. And but there was habitat, and we could release birds and establish birds, but we couldn't do it with a locked gate, So, I mean, things like that, when you're working with birds of prey, with good biologists, with good fundamentals of biology, do lend themselves to other species as well, like the space program.
Sure. No, it makes total sense. Yeah, I mean, because there's lots of animals that share the same types of environment and habitat. And, I mean, if you can, well, I guess in this case would be kind of a bad pun, but, killing multiple birds with one stone, so to speak,
Yeah, and how do you work with people? How do you do it without alienating people, without people thinking you're taking something away from them? For instance, in Texas, ranchers, they like wildlife. Guess what? But if you give them a chance where they can still think they can send their kids to college and you're not going to tell them what to do, they want to help you. And those are our biggest supporters. Now. So again, I come back to the whole people aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's usually the hardest thing to maneuver in a lot of those waters. I can totally appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I mean, before we start to wrap things up, though, I mean, I do want to. I mean, we could go on. Like I said, that's the one thing that's always the bummer. And ideally, hopefully, there's always time for future conversations and things like that. I mean, I know I can. Unfortunately, in an hour and a half to 2 hours or whatever, you can only scratch the surface of most people's like experiences and lives. But before we do kind of start to wrap this up, I do want to get one of your more memorable hunting experiences, stories, flights, memories, particular bird, whichever one you want to choose. But
wow.
I know it's a broad question, but it seems like, though, when I've gathered after doing this 100 and some odd times, like there's always one in particular that seems to kind of stick out more so than others. Sometimes it's someone's first a head of game they ever took or whatever the case is. But I mean, there's always at least one experience or two that kind of always are at the forefront of the recollection, so to speak. But
God, for me, it's that very next grouse flush. I mean, everyone is pretty memorable. Honestly, gosh, I don't really, God, that's a tough one for me to answer. It really is, I mean, I'm tickled to death to go out there tomorrow morning and see what the bird will do. And the other day was pretty good. But I mean, I don't know. I don't really have one. I mean, there are particular birds that have been unbelievable. You know, I had a jerkin that caught 12 sharptails in a row and missed about 30 in a row. But I don't. And I remember the first sharptail I caught. I was with Pete Widener. I had a passenger falcon, and I'll never forget because we flushed it out of a windrow in Augusta, Montana. Went out, the juror stooped it and caught it pretty easily. And I remember, I'll never forget, Pete Widener goes, "Yeah, just what I thought. They're easy." Yeah, we had no idea.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
That one was,
yeah. And once again, I mean, that's the whole relative experience thing. You know, is sometimes you just don't know what you have if you don't have any recollections or experiences or anything like that to compare it to. You know, if that's
those great flights, the ones that stick out in your mind are usually ones where you didn't catch game.
Yeah, I found that a lot.
Oh God, when you have your bird up like a speck, and your flush ducks are typical, and they usually miss by a mile a lot of times. I'm surprised at that. You think that they never miss from a high pitch like that. It's a beautiful flight. But anyway, I can't really answer that question adequately. I'm sorry.
No. That was a good little thing though. I mean, like, once again, it's important for people to hear, even from someone that's got as many years experience under their belt as guys like yourself do. I mean, I think for anybody that's in this for a prolonged period of time understands, but you don't whenever you're initially coming into it, that there are certain things that are exceptional and there's certain things that are really cool, but they're not like anything that are really like, out of the ordinary type of accomplishments and stuff. But yeah, I mean, we all have our own little frames of reference, and yeah, I mean,
I guess for me, my most memorable flight is the expectation of my next flight. I mean, I really believe that.
Yeah.
And the flights that go the way they're supposed to go, the bird goes up, dog's on point, perfect flush, comes down, catches the grouse. Well, they don't stick in your mind.
Yeah.
They just don't.
No, and I understand what you say about the some of the most memorable ones are the misses. I mean, there's
oh my gosh,
I mean, there's been some really funny instances I've seen with like the first red tail I ever flew. He was just going after this cottontail, and then like anytime you see like a cottontail or a jackrabbit jump or leapfrog or somersault over your bird and this, that, and the other, it's like all of a sudden you're rooting for the rabbit.
Of course.
It's like that kind of stuff. I totally get it. Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes some of the best flights are the ones that you come back empty handed with. It's just the nature of the beast. But well, and so I mean, this is probably going to be another one that may or may not be hard for you to answer, but how I usually like to end these also is getting a good piece of advice or a sentiment or something to pass along to current and future generations of falconers that you think's important to keep into perspective or whatever the case might be. But that's how I usually like to end these, and I'd like to get one from you if you don't mind before we wrap this up.
Well, I guess the big concern I always have is the condition of the bird. I like to see a bird that's happy, a contented bird. And I also think that it's really important that you sort of extract every ounce of enjoyment out of your relationship with this bird in the field. It has nothing to do with catching game. It has nothing to do with if your bird flies higher than someone else's bird. It's how much fun are you having in the field with that bird. And there's nothing like having a peregrine, on the block with those little cheek feathers fluffed up. I mean, that's a very comfortable bird, and you've done a good job in your management to maintain that.
Sure.
I think that's important. So I guess the care and welfare of the bird that you have and how much fun you're having in the field has nothing to do with what you're catching or how high your bird's flying or any of that.
Yeah, I mean,
chances are that's going to be there too.
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, if you're doing things right and like you should, then odds are the other things are going to come with with that, but
that didn't really answer your question, I don't think.
No, I think what you were saying or getting at though is, just the relationship with the bird, doing what you can to maintain that. And I'm sure that's probably what you're getting at, right? More or less, is just maintaining that relationship is very important, more so than some of the other aspects that kind of come hand in hand with,
I don't like seeing people cut birds to get them really keen. I like to see birds flown as high a condition as possible. They're stronger, I can remember hawking ducks with Jimmy Walker with a Thunderbird a couple of years ago, and this bird was pretty fat, and she hadn't caught a duck yet. It was a brand new bird, and we flushed duck after duck after duck, and she kind of, and then we finally did catch one, and he's sort of shaking his head, and I go, Jimmy, I said, anybody can catch a duck with a hungry peregrine. It takes a real falconer to catch a duck with a fat peregrine, overweight. And he just cracked up. But there's an essence of truth to that. I should have had a little bit hungrier, but if you persevere, that bird went on to catch lots of ducks, not a problem. But the point is, fly them as close to the wild condition as possible. Again, it goes back to what you said earlier. We're kind of bird watchers, aren't we? We just want to see what they do.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. And that's what makes it addictive, that front row seat, for sure. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you, sharing all these different, I know we brushed over in a lot of generalities. So, but once again, how can you encompass, all these different decades in such a short amount of time? But it was fun hearing about your childhood, and then everything from that to hitching all the way across the country, how did that work, by the way?
That was actually great. I flew back east. I'd already lost my peregrine in Missoula, and I flew back east for Christmas in one of those charter flights with a whole bunch of kids from school. And Jim Rice gave me this puppy, and Joe Taggart gave me a peregrine he hadn't flown yet. And so, I couldn't get back on a commercial plane with these two things. So I had a friend that said, well, I got a friend that's driving back from New Jersey. And so I got my mom to drive me up to this exit of the New Jersey Turnpike, and I get out of the car with this falcon and this dog, and this girl goes, oh, no, there's no way. I'm not taking that falcon, that dog, in this little car. And it was a girl, and actually the connection was her boyfriend. Well, long story short, by South Dakota, she had broken up with her boyfriend. I was driving the car. He was in the back seat. Boy, those were the days.
That's hilarious.
But that went on to be a wonderful peregrine and a wonderful dog. It was funny how rags are riches,
Yeah, I can only imagine what the conversations and some of the moments of silence temporarily were probably like on that drive.
Can you imagine?
You could have probably cut the tension with a knife, man.
Oh God. Yeah, no, I thought it wasn't going to happen. She said no, you're just not doing it. I begged and begged, and I remember sitting in the back with the falcon and the dog in my lap.
Yeah, just kind of crunched up with the dog and a falcon in the back seat for what that probably would have been, at least like a 30-something hour drive.
Yeah, probably 40. Yeah.
Oh man, that's great though. That's I don't envy that situation.
No, it was great because I went from nothing to another bird, another dog, my first bird dog, and I had that bird for a long, long time.
Well, I'm glad that at least that couple days worth of momentary suffering were worth it, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, Pete, like I said, thank you again so much for being willing to share a lot of the stuff. And, I am always appreciative of people's time and thanks for at least taking some time out of your day. I don't know if you had a chance to go hawking real quick before you came and did this, or if you're just going later this afternoon or
tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Fair enough. Well, I'm glad I at least didn't interfere too much with that today anyway. And and
I would have rescheduled with you. Don't worry.
Fair enough.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again some other time. So.